He is the CEO of ClusterTruck, and seriously, he's one of our city's most successful and progressive entrepreneurs. He began his career with email content and marketing, which we all know about ExactTarget. He was a co-founder of ExactTarget in 2000, and then also with Compendium in 2007, and both were sold to publicly traded companies. And Chris is going to talk a little bit about his background, but he has a very non-traditional way of getting to that point where you start two companies that are then bought by publicly traded companies. The idea behind both of those companies comes down to what he calls a marketing democracy by using digital tools to level the playing field between large and small companies. While he was still running Compendium, he became interested in learning more about sustainable farming while reading a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. And then he took the interest he had in that book and turned it into a passion for sustainable agriculture, and then turned that into a successful business when he purchased land in Greenfield and started Tyner Pond Farm in 2010. And it raises and sells sustainable non-GMO meat. And then he didn't stop there. When the Frost Mug in Greenfield closed its doors in 2013, after 50 years, he saw the opportunity to bring it back with new and old customers in mind. The mug opened in summer of 2014, and by December, it had already won Indianapolis Monthly's magazine Best of Indie Food and Drink. In 2016, he launched ClusterTruck, the on-demand food delivery service, which cooks and dispatches meals from a centralized kitchen. I learned a new term reading about you. It's called the dark kitchen. So I'm smarter today after reading that. Since then, the company has grown exponentially and expanded into additional cities, including Columbus, Ohio, Kansas City, Denver, and then just recently in Carmel. And last month, they announced a huge partnership with Kroger, bringing the Kroger delivery kitchen powered by ClusterTruck to the one in Carmel. So as he has progressed through his entrepreneurial career, he has consistently looked at business through a moral lens and firmly supports and believes that ethics matter in all businesses. So that's fantastic. So I'd like to bring Chris up. He's going to talk, and then we'll have a Q&A, so don't forget to bring up those white cards. Come on up, Chris. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. So my son is here in the audience, and he asked me yesterday if I was nervous, and I said, no, why would I be nervous? And I promise you I'm very nervous right now. This is by far the biggest group I've ever spoken to. I'm not a normal suit wearer. I've left my phone on the table, so I've got a lot of anxiety. But thank you all. Hey. Now I feel better. Steve's here. So, at any rate, thank you all so much. This is a really big honor for me. And I just thought that, in talking with the organizers, that perhaps talking a little bit about how my mind works about startups might be helpful to other people. Like, how do you think about it? How do you start a company? How do I start a company? So I thought that I would talk about ClusterTruck, just because that's the most recent, and to the point that we are having great success. We just got this amazing partnership going with Kroger that, we're in 5 stores now, and hopefully, Kroger has 2,800 underutilized kitchens around the country, and they want to compete and disrupt, and hopefully our software will solve that problem for them. So we're really excited about that. But, I just wanted to say first, and I'm sorry, I have note cards. You know how hard it is to find note cards in this day and age? One of the things I realize about myself is I'm a follower, not an inventor. If I look back on the companies that have been successful, because I've had many failures as well, the ones that have been successful, I didn't invent the market. I've really been fortunate to be able to go into existing markets with a little bit better solution. I think I'm very lucky because I see a lot of friction in things. I'm not very patient. I'm not very good on a computer, so when things don't work well for me, they call me at work the UI breaker, user interface breaker, but so it makes me very, very frustrated and causes a lot of friction. And when I see friction, that kind of motivates me to do something. I think another thing is that I read a lot, and also I network a lot. And by networking, I'm terrible. I'm quite an introvert, actually, and I don't really like networking events or mingling at parties and things like that. But I do have a big interest in people, and I talk to all kinds of people, and I really like to get to know them. And that's helped me, because you never know what various data points are going to come up and inspire you or fill a gap where, wait, I heard someone say this, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I tell my son, Matt, one thing, you can just never over-network. You cannot know too many people. And I also do better if I understand the problem. When I've started businesses that I see a problem but I've never had, I fail. When I start a company where I actually have the problem, I do much better. And I'm just really, really lucky. There's an ExactTarget story that not a lot of people know about, but I had a dry cleaning business, and the business was failing miserably, and it's a longer story that I'm going to tell here today because they're going to give me the hook in a few minutes anyway. But I had all this data, and I was going to be this data-driven dry cleaner, and I couldn't leverage the data. And so I thought, wow, maybe email would solve my problem. And I put sheets out on my dry cleaning counters. Do you have AOL? Do you have email? And that's really how ExactTarget started, right? And the ball started rolling. And then I was doing this as a service for other dry cleaners. And, unbeknownst to me, a company called Constant Contact existed. Like, I could have bought a piece of software for $40 a month from Constant Contact that would have solved my problem. And there would be no ExactTarget, and I wouldn't be standing here. It's just like my own personal head in the sand about that. And just I think about that all the time, because I know the CEO of Constant Contact now, and I actually use Constant Contact in my farm business. But just the irony of, had I known about Constant Contact, there would be no ExactTarget. There would be no Salesforce Tower, just weird stuff. As far as ClusterTruck goes, this again came from various data points. I started the farm. I was very, very motivated with Tyner Pond Farm, and we are an e-commerce company that raises and processes, so we're vertically integrated. We raise animals on pasture, we process them ourselves, we sell them ourselves direct to the consumer. We don't ship, we deliver, so we deliver to people within a 70-mile radius of central Indiana, and it was a great little business. And I wound up with this product imbalance that was every steer, I can sell my fillets today, and I'm stuck with 400 pounds of hamburger. And over time, I've been stockpiling hamburger. And one day I got a $5,000 freezer bill from Midwest Storage or someplace, because I just have pallets of hamburger. Well, then this hamburger stand came available, and I was like, okay, we're going to buy this hamburger stand, we're going to fix it up, and move our hamburger that way. And that really, really helped our business. And the mug, if you haven't been there, it's great. We hired a chef. We wanted something that was familiar. I've still never cooked anything there, so I'm not really a restaurateur. But that got me a foot into the restaurant business. And then one day in 2014, I saw Grubhub go public, like watching CNBC, like I'm sure a lot of us do. I was watching CNBC, and I saw Grubhub go public, and they were talking to the CEO, Matt Maloney, and I just thought in my head, this is not going to work, right? This is a terrible, terrible way to do this and solve this problem. And I couldn't stop thinking about it then. And two things that struck me, one was the data aspect of it, right? Because my DNA has been about data my entire career, I thought I would never give up my customer relationship, right? I'm not going to give anyone else my data, right? And these companies, these third parties go in, work with these restaurants, and basically now they know that Chris Baggott buys hamburgers, and they're going to sell that data to another hamburger seller saying, hey, give Chris $5 off and he'll buy your hamburger, right? It's completely corrupt. I hated it. And the next big lie I heard him say was this idea of incremental volume. He was talking about his business model, and he was saying, we bring these small businesses incremental volume. And as a small business dry cleaner, I knew incremental volume to be a lie. And at the mug, I knew it to be a lie. When you are a small business person and you hear incremental volume, you think that it's less friction, that it's like extra business, like, it's business on the side and it'll be more profitable. And exactly the opposite is true. And I knew this a lot because at ExactTarget, one of our big clients was Groupon. And anybody remember Groupon? Barely, right? But Groupon at the time was the fastest growing company in history. Like, no company ever got to $1 billion in revenue faster than Groupon. And what they did was they would sell these deals to businesses and deals to consumers, and every business in America tried it for a couple of years, and pretty much every business in America stopped doing it on the same day. I mean, you could see their IPO, and you could see their stock price go from $75 to $4, literally over a period of about 4 months, and it's never recovered, right? They were also selling incremental volume to small businesses. And then the third thing that got me interested in this was looking at the reviews, and this might even be the most important thing. So I was going on Yelp and Google and looking at the reviews of Grubhub, and they were the first. So this is 2015 now, and everyone hates them, right? They have 1 star. So then, as an entrepreneur, you're thinking, wait a second, I've got this gigantic industry. Prepared food delivery is the fastest growing industry in the country, and everyone hates the incumbent solution. Like, that's catnip to people like us, right? So then it's like, okay, well, what qualifies me to solve it? And this is where the networking part comes in. Why do I think I can do better, and how would I do it better? And I was just running through a list, and I see Mike Langelier here, and my very first point, I did not know Mike was going to be here until a little while ago, but Mike introduced me to Neil Brown of Pizzology. And we were talking because Mike invited us both to hear a pitch from somebody building a restaurant software system. So Neil, because he knew something about restaurants, me, because I knew something about software. And Neil and I got to talking, and I was telling about this idea I had at Exact Target when Papa John's was a client. It might still be, but a client when I was there. And I was trying to pitch Papa John's, back in 2006, on sending an email every day at 3 o'clock with a click down where people could schedule a pizza to be delivered. They never did it, but I thought that was a genius idea. And Neil, who owned Pizzology, made this craft pizza. And he says, well, that would work for Papa John's because they've got food scientists down there doing nothing but thinking about how does a pizza still taste good after 45 minutes. And he said, I hate to see my pizza even go out the door on takeout. He said, I've got this craft pizza and these Marzelli tomatoes and this craft crust, and my pizza doesn't taste good 10 minutes later, right? You need to eat it now. And so we started to talk about, like, okay, this is a mom, she scheduled it. What if I could track her and know that her boss held her up and she wasn't going to be home at 7 o'clock to have that pizza delivered? And, so that had nothing to do with seeing Groupon go public. It was a couple years before, I think, but that was always in my head, this idea of proximity. So then you start reading these Groupon reviews and you realize that the problem is the food's terrible because when the customer places the order, they have no idea where the driver is. So if you have a 45-minute or 55-minute or an hour-and-a-half delivery, the restaurant gets an order to make that food, right? So that food is probably made 5 minutes after the order is placed. But we don't know where the driver is. We don't know when the driver is going to show up. And that was from this Neil Brown, Mike Langelier conversation, wait a second. What if I knew where the driver was and I was cooking the food, and if the driver was 10 minutes away from the kitchen and I know the food's going to take 5 minutes to make, don't start it till the driver's only 5 minutes away. That way, when they're pulling up, their food will be hot and fresh. And that random conversation, years before I was even thinking about ClusterTruck, was actually the big inspiration. I had a conversation with a food truck guy, Matt Kornmeyer, and Matt had come to me and he was trying to finance a restaurant, and he owned Scratch Truck. And at the time, Scratch Truck was the #1 food truck in Indianapolis. And we were just talking about the food truck business, which is terrible. And he mentioned that, well, when a food truck is out and there's one truck, we will make $1. And when there are 8 trucks together, those events we like to call cluster trucks. And those cluster trucks, everyone makes more money because people like to eat different things. So if you and I are going to lunch and we go to a cluster truck, I can get a cheeseburger and you can get pad thai and someone else can get pizza and we can all go over to the dessert truck. And so that kind of stuck in my head, right? Like I would do better if we made a lot of different kinds of food. So that was like a random encounter. Mike Tambasco was our chef for the Mug and kind of inspired that menu. And as I was talking about this, how do you cook all the food? And I was sort of thinking cafeteria. I have another friend, Nancy Davis, in Greenfield, and she used to run all the Lilly Aramark cafeterias. And, we went down there and looked at how cafeterias make all the food. And Mike introduced me to the folks at Cheesecake Factory here in Carmel or Castleton or wherever it is. And seeing how Cheesecake Factory, which is the highest revenue restaurant on earth, right? They do $13 million a unit. Their next closest competitor might do $6 or $7 million a unit. So seeing the whole cheesecake system, and that also reinforced that people love cheesecake because they love that giant menu, right? So that random encounter. One night I was at the Mira Awards. I won a Trailblazer Award, and last time I gave a speech, I think, 5 years ago. And I hopped in a lift. My wife and I hop in a lift with, just a lift, right? And we're in this lift, and in the back seat in the flyer was this flyer, or in the pocket there was a flyer for this company called E-Potting Shed. And my wife said, E-Potting Shed, we just got one of these. And I think I had just sold Compendium, actually. And so our law firm, Ice Miller, had sent me this E-Potting Shed. And the driver was like, are you the Baggotts? Because he'd sold one, that week, So that guy is now our COO. So he was trying to get this e-commerce company started. He comes from a family of florists and gardeners, but I started talking to Rob, and Rob was a political consultant in D.C. for 15 years and was pretty jaded on the whole process, and he had come home and he was starting this e-commerce business. But Rob was very, very thoughtful about the gig economy, right? Now, if you think back to 2015, and it hasn't changed a bit, but, that was when Travis was on YouTube abusing a driver, and we were having an election, and people were talking about making 1099s employees and all of these things. But the driver pool for gig economy we use the word dignity. There just isn't any dignity there. But I didn't know that. But knowing Rob, that really became the information to really drive the entire business and what we try and do. And we thought, and honestly, I hired Rob out of my pocket to go work at every gig job in the country, Postmates, Instacart, DoorDash, Uber. And he spent probably 6 months just learning everything about the gig economy and how it worked with the mental lens of, this is broken, how do we fix it? And we really set as a standard, day one, we're going to take the worst job in the gig economy and make it the best job in the gig economy, right? And you do that by bringing dignity to these 1099s. And that's proven with us. We have drivers now that make over $80,000 a year driving for us. We have zero turnover. Our competitors spend more money recruiting drivers than they do. They spend more money recruiting drivers than they do marketing to consumers, right? Because the turnover is so bad, you'll never see the same DoorDash driver twice. I mean, it's an awful, awful job, and they can't make any money, and that's why they're so angry. That's why laws are being passed. Meanwhile, we have zero turnover, right? 75% of our drivers system-wide started the very first week we opened, whatever kitchen it is, and they never leave, which makes them better drivers, makes them happier, becomes a front-facing customer service for us. It's fantastic. And again, the most important thing of our business is because I started talking to my Lyft driver, right? I mean, that's very random. Along the way, I, through Neil, was trying to network to every chef and every restaurant owner I could find because I desperately wanted someone to tell me this was a really bad idea. And I kept talking to them, and no one would tell me it was a bad idea. And I finally, the mother lode in Indianapolis is Mike Cunningham and Cunningham Restaurant Groups. And finally, and Mike blew me off for 6 months, and finally we met and talked about it, and Mike called me the next day and was like, I want to be your partner, you need me, and here's why you need me. And of course, I did need him. I didn't know anything about restaurants or kitchens, and I was going to do it with a food truck, and yeah. And through him, he had a person working for him, and again, a random conversation with Mike and a couple of folks, and I'm like, one day, just like, we just need a cheesecake guy. And some random person in this office was like, well, we got a guy down in Louisville who we moved from California. He really wants to be in Indianapolis, and he's got 15 years running cheesecake factories. Perfect, right? So, and then, in spite of the fact that I've been in the software business a long time, I don't know anything about software. I can code less now than I could in 1983 when I was in college. And software is a black box. Like, it's really scary for folks like us because you're going to build an entire software business and you don't know if it's any good or not, right? And so that gets me to Dan McFadden, who, again, I didn't hire Dan, my CTO at Compendium hired Dan, and that's a whole nother random story, meeting that guy. But when we were acquired by Oracle, Dan was part of the deal. Like I don't know anything about software, but I bet Oracle knows a lot about software. And they were basically like, we will buy this company, but this guy's going to sign a 2-year contract, and he's coming with us. And so then I knew the best guy in town is Dan McFadden. 2 years to the day that his employment contract ran out with Oracle is when we started ClusterTruck. So just a little brief thing. And then I think I'll talk a little bit about fundraising, right? How do you get a business started? How do you get it funded? And, my success, I'm terrible with VCs, right, Don? Right? I really am. I'm just not good at it. And for some reason, I've had these companies that have been successful and made money and had great exits for my investors, but it's very difficult for me to raise venture capital. So what I am kind of good at is building relationships with people. So my brother-in-law and dear friend and advisor, Scott Dorsey, kind of always says, you're the master of passing the hat, right? But I think it's a really good way to start your company, and that is, getting small checks from a lot of people. Oftentimes, it's a lot better for the entrepreneur and a lot more freeing to have 10 investors or 50 investors. I mean, we're over 100 investors in ClusterTruck, and we've raised $30 million, with small checks. Exact Target, I used to have this slide, but literally I went door to door when we started in my neighborhood. There were probably 11 houses in my little cul-de-sac area. I used to have a slide from Google Maps showing all the swimming pools. And the only people who had swimming pools were people who had invested in Exact Target. So I'm not sure, correlation is not causation, but I always took a great deal of pride in that. And we didn't have a pool, so, my kids could go to our neighbors and swim. They were always very grateful. But we literally raised $5,000 checks. When Scott and I started, it was basically we raised $200,000 at $5,000 a pop from everybody we ever met. And I still do that. We just raised $8 million in ClusterTruck, passing the hat, and it's worked pretty well. So I encourage people to do that. And the net result is that ClusterTruck is, in fact, the best model in the world. We're the only prepared food delivery company on the planet that is profitable. Like, we can make money, and we can make a lot of money. Nobody else can do that, right? The whole problem with the DoorDashes and Postmates and Instas and Ubers is they can't make any money. There's no business model there, right? They're trying to buy these customers and build market share, and they think once they get enough market share or power, like now people are talking about these companies consolidating, that they'll be able to raise prices, right? And it's like, really? Are you going to pay $15, which is their cost, for them to deliver a burrito to you? You're not, right? One of the things we had to map out early on, and one of the very first things on the whiteboard was always free delivery. We had to build a business model that required us to be able to make money with no fees. We do that by a lot of machine learning and software, but the ability to route our drivers so efficiently, and because they're always coming back to the same kitchen, and because the customer meets the driver. So now I can get a driver minimally 4 jobs an hour, and often up to 6 to 8 jobs an hour in downtown Indianapolis, for example. Whereas our competitors, Matt Maloney had an investor letter in October that's a great read if you're interested in this space. You can almost see the tears on the page. But, that it takes him 45 minutes to do a job with the driver. He's like, how am I supposed to pay a driver a living wage when every job takes 45 minutes? 1.2 jobs an hour, we're getting our folks 4 to 7 jobs an hour. It's just, we're blowing them away. So the system's working really well. How many customers do we have in the room? Yeah, thank you all. And hopefully that's because the service is great and the food is good. And we think, solve that time problem. Don't make the food old. We start with great ingredients. Everything is made fresh every day. We make our own sauces, our own stocks, our own salad dressings. We smoke our own meats. Nothing comes in off a truck except raw ingredients that we process and make into food. So it starts there, and then we start, solving the time problem. Your food will never be more than 6 minutes old, even if your delivery might take 50 minutes sometimes. And that's really been the breakthrough. Our delivery costs with no fees, our costs are under 9%. Our competitors' costs are closer to 50 to 60%. And there's no way around that. So And that's really that for my prepared comments, and happy to entertain any questions.
Okay, we're going to sit. We're going to come on over.
Okay.
Out on the far side. Okay, well, that was fascinating. You've got quite...
Was it really?
Yes, it was. It was. Couple things. I know, and we were talking at the table, too, you talked about your first business was a dry cleaners. And everyone thinks about, I'm going to own my first business, it's going to be very successful. And you actually had that be a big failure, which then set your thinking straight for your next step. So in that whole dry cleaners experience, did you say it was 9 years, I think?
Yeah.
What was your big lesson out of that then sort of got you on the right path?
What I learned very quickly, not quickly, 9 years, but my takeaway was what I'm really good at and what I'm really bad at. I'm not a good manager. I'm not really a good leader. And just the kind of people to surround myself. And of course, I hit the jackpot with Scott, right? Because Scott, may not be as aggressive as I am or entrepreneurial startup-wise, but he's the most amazing leader, that I've ever met. And that combination was perfect. And that's what I've really tried to do is, I think every one of us can just learn what are your strengths and weaknesses. And the faster you learn that, and put no ego in hiring someone smarter than you and better than you, or partnering with someone smarter and better than you. I talk to entrepreneurs a lot that, this is my best friend, and we're exactly the same, and we're going to do this. And I'm like, yeah, well, you're all doing that. Who's going to do this, right? And, diversity is a real thing, and the more you can bring people in that offset your weaknesses, the better.
And so, we've all read that self-awareness is a huge key to success. And so it sounds like early on you'd said, okay, I'm self-aware.
Well, I was 40, so not that early, but I don't know how self-aware I am even today. So that magazine article described, people have described awkward social interactions with Chris. That and my wife, what else did they say in that article? My wife remains bewildered. Yeah, those were my two takeaways from that story. Yeah,
Scott is a great leader. When I was the president of the Sports Corporation, he was my board chairman, and he is a great leader. But it takes a whole mix of people,
really
as
does.
You've been describing.
And, just being able to build a great team, having the discipline to replace teammates that, maybe got you this far but can't get you to the next part. When those things are hard, but it's the organization is the most important thing, and the success is the most important thing.
Yeah. So switch to farming for a second.
Okay.
20 years ago, you never said, okay, I'm going to own a farm. Now you do. What's your what's your biggest surprise about owning a farm, managing the farm?
I think my biggest surprise in agriculture generally, and I hate to use the word corrupt, but just how corrupt it is. And, monopolistic and these poor farmers are trapped in a system that isn't good for them. But everyone tells them what I'm doing is insane. I make $3,000 an acre, and I cannot keep up with demand. I need more farmers doing what I do just to supply Tyner Pond in central Indiana. We eat $8.8 billion worth of meat in the state of Indiana every year. Maybe 10 million of that comes from Indiana. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so you don't want to get me started on this. But yes, there's a, Farm Bureau has a giant pig outside the governor's office, right? I can't compete with that, right? And, these monopolies, like in the whole system of our government, like monopolies are supposed to be bad. People are worried about Facebook, and meanwhile, Monsanto controls 90% of all the seed in the world. It's just very, very broken.
Okay, I've got a couple of really...
Sorry.
That's okay. No, it's
some
all
softball,
right.
something less heavy.
That's okay. I have a couple of really interesting questions. Okay, this is going to be a little bit of a brain teaser. What's the best investment you've made in the last 6 months under $100?
Okay.
We're going to give him a second, because good job, whoever threw that out here. That's a brain teaser. Because everybody wants to do what you're doing.
I bought a bread machine.
You bought a bread machine?
I bought a bread machine, yes.
Okay.
And I like making my own bread, and I grind my own wheat, and playing around with different varieties of wheat, and I've just been failing at the actual bread part of it. And I brought a bread machine and, made about 4 loaves of bread, and it's amazing. And I'm pretty sure that was under $100.
Okay, all right, good. We should all go do that. You mentioned up here your DNA is about data. Has it always been that way? Or was that something that was developed? Or when you were this high, were you wired that way?
No, I'm not a math person. I mean, I think the old SATs, I think I was under 500 in math. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was terrible. But I got really, really lucky. A lot of people probably read the Malcolm Gladwell book about the 10,000 hours, right? And I started my career the day the PC became a thing, right? And in college, I went to a small school, but was kind of advanced as far as technology went. I had access to a computer. Like, I can write my papers on a computer, which no college I know of could do that. But, I remember Lotus 123 on a Radio Shack computer and learning to be able to sort just columns of, and when I got into my first job was with Abbott Laboratories up in Chicago, and I was in marketing, and, just being able to sort on columns of behaviors. Tell me, hospitals that are under 400 beds, like that was ridiculously revolutionary back then. It used to be these giant books you'd have to leaf through and find the page, and, suddenly I could just have a spreadsheet. So I got very, very lucky in the early 80s, mid 80s, like getting my hands on Lotus 123, which became Excel. I tell my son Matt, or anyone, the most important skill anyone can learn in college is Excel.
Yeah.
That's sort of how I got started, and that's when I think about my 10,000 hours, that's what I think about.
Okay, that's great. I remember Lotus 123 too. Okay, this is a great question from the writer. I assumed you reached a point where it seemed you could not reach your goals due to seemingly insurmountable circumstances with business. How did you press through that?
Well, it's interesting. Scott and I were both in the same position coming into Exact Target, which, like the Richard Gere movie, we had nowhere else to go either. We didn't want to go get jobs. I was probably unqualified to actually get a job at that point. It really was kind of a desperate thing. Like, okay, we have to make this work. And, we're family. We have to make this relationship work. Right. And I think that's important. It gets to be a little bit problematic. I can remember being in Seattle a few years ago. Expedia was a customer of ours at Compendium, and I was talking to the people I was with, and we were like out, going to dinner, and I was like, whatever happened to the startups in Seattle, right? Like, Seattle used to be cool. And he's like, we have it too good. And I was with engineers, and he's like, there's Amazon, and if I don't want to work at Amazon, I'll walk across the street to Microsoft, and I think a big part of our startup ecosystem in the last 10 or 20 years has really been, there hasn't been a lot of competition from big companies. Now, Salesforce has obviously made themselves felt in my startup community now because, I know a young friend of mine that's making $350,000 a year in a job he kind of hates, but he's not leaving, the stock's going like this, he's making $350,000 a year, he's like, I can do this for another 10 years, but, and I think that does hurt the startup ecosystem a little bit. Not exactly the question you asked.
No, that's okay. It was a good answer. We've got a couple guesses on how you came up with the name of Tyner Farms, so why don't you explain that?
Oh, geez, yeah, and do you really want to hear the answer?
Yeah.
I started off with the name Honeysuckle Grange, and my wife likes honeysuckles, and we had this plan, we're going to plant all these honeysuckles, and we'll wake up in the morning and smell the beautiful honeysuckles, and I was looking for a honeysuckle farm. That domain was taken. Grange was a synonym, so we called it Honeysuckle Grange. And then we were planting the honeysuckle along the road, and a farmer pulled up in a truck, and, what are you doing with that weed? It's like, what? What are you talking about? And I was already getting kind of a reputation out there because what I do is considered crazy among the farmers, right? And he's like, if you want to be even more unpopular, keep planting that weed. We've been trying to eradicate that weed, and he wasn't mean about it. It was a fact. We've been trying to eradicate that weed for 50 years here. So then I have Honeysuckle Grange with no honeysuckle. About a week after that, I got a basically cease and desist trademark infringement from the International Brotherhood of the Grange, who apparently owns the trademark of the Grange. And I'm not going to change. I'm all angry. I'm on Facebook trying to find other Granges. I found this woman who owns Brooklyn Grange, which is a roof garden business in Brooklyn, New York. And so I call her, and she's like, don't fight him. I went to Harvard. I have Harvard lawyer friends. We couldn't beat them if you can get out of it. So I was like, so no more Honeysuckle Grange. We had a weather vane up on our barn with Honeysuckle Grange on it. It was beautiful. But Elijah Tyner was the founder of Hancock County, had the first farm in the county. I looked in the phone book. There were no Tyners in the phone book, so we picked Tyner. And that's I told this story to one of my neighbors who passed away, but he was probably 85, and his wife is still alive, and she was probably 85, and I was like, yeah, and Tyner, no more Tyners. He's like, she's a Tyner. I was like, it's,
What can I know you mentioned Mike Langelier is here also. What can the city do to continue to cultivate and help the entrepreneurs, the business community, the city? What are things that would be more helpful? The Exact Target had so many great, I don't want to call them graduates, but people that graduated, then stayed here and started businesses that are very successful, and we want more and more of that. So what are a couple tips in that for the business community of ways we can continue to encourage
as far as that goes, in non-agricultural startups, this state and city is very supportive. I am so honored to be be able to say to these folks, this is the best downtown in the country, and I go to them all. This is the best airport in the country, right? I live in Greenfield. I waltz in 5 minutes before my flight with my TSA pre, don't even have to show my ticket now, and I don't know why everyone you can't slide your license, but we can, and just the whole thing is this is a very easy place to do business. I tried to start a coffee company, I did, in Pennsylvania, just loan money to a daughter of a friend of mine, to buy a coffee roasting machine. And, setting up an LLC in Pennsylvania happens on paper, and letters get passed back and forth, and it literally took 6 weeks. My accountant is yelling at me because I think I have like 50 LLCs, because you could pop up an LLC on your phone, by the time I finish this sentence in this state, things like that it's very, very easy. What I want to see more of is just thinking big, tackling, what I worry about startups in general is just the problems are too small that people are going after, and, go after the giant billions and billions of dollar problems, not, the incremental, will this company be worth $100 million? That kind of problem. And I'm a little worried about that.
Yeah.
I'm a little worried about culture.
It's
too good, by the way,
yeah.
If you're wondering my take on that. So,
and you talked about the importance of culture with your drivers and how important those employees are. And we're all trying to recruit great employees because we know our people make our business. And what's your advice about that? How do you find those great people?
Well, you create a great environment, but you have to find the right people that are on board with the mission, right? And again, one of my fears is right now I think we're becoming obsessed with culture to the point of business. like, is the business actually sustainable? But boy, you got the best culture, just like my sustainable farm, right? The first rule of sustainability is economic sustainability, right? Can you live? Do you have a real business here? Can this work? And, I just see culture coming front and center as the most important thing. And I'm not saying it's not important, but, you've got to get your fundamentals and your blocking and tackling down first.
Right.
Like I said, our drivers, that is a good culture, and that just appeared. These people, as Rob says, when they talk about Uber, Uber is them. When they talk about ClusterTruck, it's us, right? They use the word us talking about it. They feel part of the team. They've built a nice camaraderie among themselves. These are the least engaged. As far as 1099s, we are the lightest touch. We don't schedule them. We don't make anyone work. You come when you want to come. If we have work, we'll give it to you, but if you might not have work. But they very much feel like they're part of the team. And that's honestly something I take the most pride in.
You should also be proud that you have 0 turnover rate.
It's
that's
great.
Amazing.
And we have moms that can drive with kids in their car, right? So one of my favorite people is this woman, Lindsay Ritter, who started with us day one in Indianapolis here. And maybe you've had Lindsay, but she's got a daughter that was an infant 4 years ago and is now a 4-year-old. Lindsay comes in, and this would be Lindsay who would be working at Burger King, and her daughter would have to have some kind of daycare, and she'd be in a terrible car. She's been upgraded 3 cars since she's been with us. She pays no daycare. She works about 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, and her 1099 was something like $28,000 last year. Right?
Can I come work for you?
Please. Yeah. We're just opened in Carmel, so anyone who lives in Carmel that hasn't tried ClusterTruck, please. That's our first suburb, and we're really excited about that. It's working very well. I've been scared of going to the suburbs thinking it didn't have enough density, but it seems to be working really well.
And we have a question that goes right along with that. It says, I went to the website and ClusterTruck doesn't deliver in my zip code. When are you coming to 46268? That, I don't know if you know that off the top of your head.
I don't know, where is that? Yeah.
And, future plans for growth.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how this Kroger plays out and what we do there. But, our original plan was go stake out these cities, and we've made a lot of mistakes. And one of them was land grab in big cities, get downtown, and then after we have all the cities, come back around and deal with the suburbs. That turned out to be super inefficient from a marketing standpoint, right? I benefit a little bit in Indy because few people know who I am, and I can tweet out, hey, order from ClusterTruck, and people do. Shockingly, no one really cares about Chris Baggott in Denver. So our marketing spend has been much higher in other markets, and it's very inefficient because we're talking to a lot of people that can't buy the product. So I think moving in and going into cities with 4 or 5 locations at a time is probably going to be more of our plan going forward.
And for the students that are here, since you did have sort of a non-traditional path, I'm using that description for you, what encouragement will you give them? You said you struggled a bit in school. You took a different path to get there. You actually told me at the table you were whitewater raft coaching at one point, lots of things.
I think that was, one of the great things about that experience in those days, which were sort of the late 70s to early, 81 or 82 was probably my last year, 83, I think. But in those days, people who paddled a kayak in whitewater went to Princeton, right? This was a very blue blood kind of environment. So I came from a coal mining town in western Pennsylvania, terrible student. My kids look at my report cards and they're all F's and D's. But my peer group went to Princeton, and that was really good for me to, so I guess hang around really smart people, because you'll find out that they're really not that much, they're not different than you, right? They may have had better opportunities or, whatever. But, and then the other thing is join a startup. You want to learn about how to be in a startup, join a startup, and, get that education and, learn what that's like before you start. Scott said something brilliant yesterday talking about making the transition, people who try and make the transition from corporate life to startup life. And it was just, I've texted him 3 times about it. I think he should write a book. But, what he said is when you're in the corporate world, your job is to triage all kinds of things coming at you and try and prioritize all this noise coming at you and how do I sort through which meeting's important, what's the agenda. When you're in a startup, you're sitting like this. He's like, there is 0 coming at you, and that's scary, right? And you have to make everything happen. I just thought that was really smart, and that's why I tell people if you're interested in being in a startup or doing startups, join startups.
Yeah, well, this is a great town to do it in, too.
It is.
Great
There's lots of opportunity, and everyone's very, very hungry.
And nationally, we're getting a reputation for being a tech sector, which is a great thing.
No, it really is. It's the perfect place. There used to be a beef about money, but I don't even really think that's an issue anymore. First of all, there's plenty of money here. Pass the hat, the work that Don's doing, locally, and then, plenty of big-time VCs have made a lot of money here. So no one is looking at us anymore going, like, I'm not going to invest in the Midwest. I'm not going to invest in Indianapolis. Megan Glover, 120 Water Audit, I think she had the biggest Series A in the country this year. Nobody even knows about it.
Yeah.
$7 million Series A for 120 Water Audit, and here, and doesn't even make news, really.
Well, it's been great to have you. What's
Thank you.
The last takeaway on ClusterTruck? What do you want everyone to know?
www.clustertruck. Always be selling. That's. But no, thank you. It's a great place. I'm really honored. I'm sure you're all here because you want to be, right? And not just in this room, but in this city. And it's just a great place to be and do business and live a life.
Great. Well, you've been delightful. It's been wonderful to have you here today and share some wisdom and some lessons and some failures. We all have failures, and then make the best out of them.
Well, thank you
Thank you so much for
my
coming.
pleasure.
Let's
Thanks.
give Chris a big hand.